that I usually give. I'm used to giving more science-based talks, and it's not that this isn't science-related, but I'll be talking about a series of visual representations of the science problems that we are thinking about in the California current ecosystem in kind of the middle of the talk. And so it's a different presentation than I'm used to giving normally. So if there are any urgent questions, I might see them if you type urgent in your question over on the sidebar there. So with that caveat, I'm going to give a little backstory with the first few slides. And on this front slide here, I want to acknowledge Hunter Hathaway, who is a graphical artist at University of Washington in the Center for Environmental Visualization. And he is really the person who makes these complex ideas that I have in my head about graphics that I want look beautiful. And so he gets a ton of the credit for anything that you like in the slides that I show you today. And Ocean Acidification Program at NOAA, I would like to thank for funding this effort. We put in a proposal for a data synthesis and visualization project, and these slides are an outcome of that project. So you might all recognize this slide. This was from our website that our new website that we released, I don't know, 6 years ago, I guess, at this point. And this was just sort of a cartoon of some of the major processes involved with coastal carbon dynamics. And in starting the project that I'm presenting on today, it occurred to me that I have seen this slide from our website in many talks, including one that Dwight gave. I don't know if Dwight's online today, where it was like every third slide he showed it and like drew boxes around different parts of it to focus on the different things. So I thought, okay, there's obviously some broader utility in creating these cartoons for our community as, you know, sort of a communication tool than just for my own use or for making a pretty web page. So that's kind of what this originally came out of. And sort of more proximally, during the West Coast cruise this year, we had a mid-cruise stop at the Exploratorium, and Dick Feely and I gave talks there on the cruise and what we were seeing. And so in the process of putting that show together, or slideshow together, I was talking about some of the different aspects of what people were studying on the cruise. So we had folks looking at harmful algal bloom production, and of course the summer before our last cruise there had been this huge harmful algal bloom on the west coast that shut down crabbing and bivalve shellfish catches for months at a time, and they were seeing, you know, more different kinds of toxins at the same time than normally have been observed on the West Coast due to this high heat that we had with the blob. So there was that. But then, you know, kind of taking a step back, you know, there were so many different issues that we were trying to put together, pieces that we're trying to put together on this cruise. There's ocean acidification, you know, as you can see, I guess you can see if I use my mouse to highlight things, you know, which we've seen a lot about in the media, and of course this community follows. Plus, then there's where it intersects with hypoxia, and then just hypoxia on its own. There's, you know, the sort of ecosystem and economic effects of harmful algal blooms. We had this, you know, disease outbreak that killed off a lot of the starfish on the West Coast, and temperature was probably a player in driving that. And we know now for sure that the elevated heat associated with the marine heat wave we had out here a few years ago drove a lot of that huge harmful algal bloom. So anyway, these are the sorts of things that we all need to try to communicate about with various stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, I think that all of us on this call are stakeholders. I, as a scientist, have a stake in this as well. So I'm not just referring to, say, industry or policymakers. In any case, I was trying to find a sort of diagram like this one I have on the right here that would kind of put all these pieces together and start to show the linkages across them. And for this presentation at the Exploratorium, I had this figure on the left from a paper in oceanography, the same issue of oceanography that had the science synthesis from your region that Rue just showed in his slides. We had this figure on West Coast upwelling ecosystems and kind of some of the key ecological processes. I thought, wouldn't it be nice to superimpose this sort of noodle diagram about all these stressors and some of the processes and the things we worry about, like the disease and mortality of different important marine organisms, and then, you know, more broadly thinking about the impacts of those on humans in a you know, visual that allowed people to kind of see the ecosystem as well as understand why we worry about these processes so much. Because this, I did get one comment after the talk, and it was on that a person liked this diagram, but it's still kind of, you know, sciencey and not very appealing to people who don't necessarily have a visual impression of the ecosystems that we spend our time thinking about. And so I started thinking about how many different kind of complicated problems that we have on our coasts, where we've got many pieces and many interested parties interacting to try to figure out how best to communicate and tackle these problems. And I saw this article yesterday, which was a really lovely look at kind of historical fishing for salmon on the Columbia River. And I just love the historical pictures, and you know, they describe these golden retriever size salmon that used to be caught there. But it occurred to me, you know, this is sort of the perfect example of one of these problems where there's a lot of different interacting parts. Like, so salmon, what do they eat? Well, maybe we know in Alaska pteropods are an important part of their diet, and whoops, maybe sometimes on the West Coast they form a significant part of the salmon diet as well. And of course, those of us working on the science of ocean acidification may have looked at the impact on pteropods and wondered about the impacts on salmon. But then, of course, it's complicated because there's also the ocean warming influences on salmon, and the blob had a huge impact on fish returning to rivers, and I understand maybe responsible for reports of quite small individuals this year in the fishery. And then those linked to orcas, which are starving, perhaps because salmons have been affected by dams, but then dams provide hydropower, which, you know, isn't that supposed to be good green energy, which would be helpful for ocean acidification? Anyway, point being, it gets complicated quickly when we try to drill down into any of these problems. And if your head is spinning right now, you know, that's where my head gets rapidly when I try to think about these. And so I will say that the slides that I'm going to show you today are, you know, what I kind of envisioned as being useful for the sorts of talks that I give. But I think there's ample opportunity for people to, you know, with probably not a lot of cost and effort, to perhaps work with the same group to modify these slides to be more suitable for the kinds of specific issues that you might be communicating about in the Northeast. So rivers, not really a big player in my slides, but of course they are a much bigger part of the ocean acidification story in your region. So, you know, that's just one example of a thing you might want to change. So I read this paper just this week thinking about this challenge, and so, you know, I think that, I don't know if folks have seen this, it was a couple weeks ago in Science, and, you know, they're just talking about the sorts of really complex ecosystem problems that I think we're all trying to figure out how to tackle. And so, you know, they had this diagram of whether the problem is tame or wicked, and, you know, tame might be something you could have a simple technical or institutional solution to, so it wouldn't be something that would cross institutional jurisdictional boundaries, if you will. And, you know, that might have a relatively simple solution. And, in contrast, wicked problems, might have a variety of factors contributing to them, like the examples that I sort of noodled through before. And so, more solutions may need to be more incremental and tested, but in either case, monitoring the effects of those are really kind of critical. And I guess, since this is the part of this sort of management story where people like me come in as the scientists who monitor ecosystem conditions, I guess I figured for me at this part of the system, it's helpful to have those sorts of visual representations of the problems that we're facing. So I look forward to, at the end, hearing thoughts that you all might have on different slides that might be useful to have to kind of deal with different parts of this sort of, in our case, multi-sector decision-making kind of process that would cross, we're working with folks, for example, in the National Park Service, EPA, state organizations, as well as industry, academia, et cetera. And so, I could appreciate that you all might have very different ideas of what sorts of slides would be useful for communicating with people that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. So with that said, jumping in, most people, I think, when they go out on the ocean, whether it's for transportation or fishing or whale watching tours, have, sort of a very superficial view of the ocean ecosystem. And by that I mean just, limited to traveling along the top surface. And so just even presenting this sort of cross-sectional look at, the kinds of main players that that inhabit our ecosystems and the linkages among, trophic levels and some of the iconic species, I think can be a useful place to start for this sort of thing. So, we've got, well, in the next slide, I think we have the same sort of photo, but with words. Oh, did I skip ahead too? I might have accidentally left out one. So I have one that's just this slide with the words on it, but no humans. So this one has obviously the words, and then also showing some of the linkages to humans. And so, on the West Coast, we've got some whales, orcas, and humpbacks, et cetera. They're sort of iconic species, as well as a number of, I keep trying to mouse just to highlight things and advancing it. Sorry about that. A number of other pinniped species that are quite charismatic and that interact with some of our iconic fish species like salmon. These are the top 4 fish species by economic value on the West Coast. And, this sort of highlights the fishing, the extractive parts of our partnership network with the shell fishing and crab fisheries, and then the finfish fisheries as well. So, there are a number of ways that people interact with this complex ecosystem. This arrow that kind of goes from the marine mammals and through seabirds is sort of meant to highlight the more kind of tourist and recreational parts of the human interaction with the coastal ecosystem. And so this is a sort of slide where, depending on who you're talking to, you could want to redraw the arrows in a different way, but this was kind of how I envisioned using this sort of slide. So then, the first sort of draft of a multi-stressor slide that I had initially envisioned after the talk at the Exploratorium was this one, which is sort of all the string in the ball of yarn at once. And, it sort of has some of these iconic species. You have your orcas and seals or sea lions, salmon, the Dungeness crab, And I guess those are sort of nondescript shellfish. Could be razor clams, or well, not razor clams, probably because those are in funnel, but any of the various shellfish species that people enjoy so much on the West Coast. And, some of the major stressors like ocean warming, ocean acidification, harmful algal blooms, although, you could pick a different combination depending on what your focus is. I didn't really mention hypoxia because I don't treat that separately here, but one certainly could. And it's intrinsically linked, of course, with acidification through respiration processes, consuming oxygen and creating CO2 under oxic conditions. So, I sort of initially envisioned this like we're trying to explain the linkages across these different stressors and sort of how each of those might affect the different marine organisms that we care about because of their ecological, economic, aesthetic importance, whatever drives your audience, and then sort of highlighting how, while any one of them might lead to disease or mortality, the interactions certainly increase the stress on the overall ecosystem. And then, how the ultimate changes that you might have in species abundance or distributions then would kind of affect either human health in the case of things like harmful algal blooms or economies. But then, this is kind of a lot to take in all at once, even if you're walking people through it. So I went through and separated out things so you can kind of layer them back together. And on an earlier version of this presentation, people also suggested I might consider making the different processes have different colored arrows. So I've tried that here for the first time today. And if you have any feedback on how much that helps, I welcome that. So first, warming, ocean warming, the thing we've kind of perhaps been most aware of for the longest. People have been studying climate change and warming and also the change in heat content of the ocean for quite a while, and we know that it can be stressful to salmon in terms of changing their metabolism and physiology. It can ramp up primary production rates, which in turn can then really affect hypoxia in bottom waters, as can just warming on its own by increasing rates of respiration in the decomposers. And so both, the increase in production rates that you might see from warming and in respiration in bottom waters can really amplify hypoxia in coastal ecosystems. Then, of course, ocean acidification involves adding CO2 to the water, and that in itself can also amplify primary production, which again has the same sort of tendency to increase hypoxia. Can also affect calcification, which may affect, oh, darn it, mouse troubles. All right, which can also affect shellfish, and we're learning possibly also crabs in the California current ecosystem. There's been work in Alaska as well on crabs that show acidification has effects on various life stages. And then harmful algal blooms, we know can both have deleterious health effects on marine mammals, but then also, while they don't appear to have deleterious effects on finfish, which don't seem to retain the toxins in high abundance, as well as crabs and shellfish, which do, and those effects can have, of course, drastic effects on human health, as well as, the socioeconomic impacts when those fisheries are closed. But then when we start to layer these stresses together, things really get complicated. So here we have ocean acidification and warming superimposed, and I chose these specific colors so that things that represent interactions between the two show up, where the yellow and the blue come together as green lines. They're also dashed to make it easier to highlight them. So, when you have both warming and acidification affecting primary production, you can start to see how difficult it is to attribute changes that you might see in primary production hypoxia to one versus the other driver, and then in turn on the disease mortality that might result from hypoxia. But then there's also this added feedback between respiration and acidification, where respiration is not just drawing down the oxygen, but leading to further acidification through increased CO2 production. And then if we look instead at just warming and harmful algal blooms, we know that ocean warming can lead to higher growth rates for harmful algal bloom species. And so there's that interaction between these two stressors, as well as just the complexity of considering the effects of each of them on the groups that are affected by either one of these stressors. Okay, so then looking at ocean acidification and harmful algal blooms, again, there's sort of complicated mix of arrows here showing the various pathways that the ecosystem might be affected by each of these stressors. But in the case of acidification, we also know that while warming may increase the growth rates, there's been some evidence through experimental work that acidification can increase the toxicity of harmful algal bloom species under certain conditions. And so, this then both thinking about warming and acidification. Warming, which we know influenced the 2015 West Coast bloom, and acidification, which through experimental work we think may be important, and modeling work, which suggests that over the next century, in fact, acidification will be the bigger driver in changes in primary producers. One might really start to be worried about the effects of the twin stressors of CO2 on the ocean ecosystem, warming and acidification, having sort of a really sort of disturbing impact on both the frequency and toxicity of blooms that we see here. Okay, so then putting it all back together, I think this is a little bit better in terms of tracing which stressors are influencing which parts of the ecosystem with the colors. So I like it better this way, but again, I'm open to feedback on parts of this. And let's see, okay, so in the next slide, I tried to just add in the explicit consideration of hypoxia here, where, I can't remember exactly what my thinking was on this yesterday, but I guess more just showing with the dashed lines, the interactions between warming, which has an effect on hypoxia, and hypoxia, which is a stressor itself. So dashed lines I've been using to mean kind of interactions between stressors. But then I guess I will just tell you that one of the suggestions I got on the last webinar that I did showing these slides was that, one could put pluses or minuses to reflect the direction of the impact of each of these stressors on the organisms. And I kind of felt like that was too busy. I felt like that might be better to add after the fact, or to just verbally walk through, but that's a judgment call, and so I didn't add those, but could be a good thing depending on the audiences. Or you could, I guess, instead use dashed arrows for negative effects and solid arrows for positive effects. So feedback on those issues would be welcome. Okay, and then there's also the level of complexity in thinking about these impacts of the fact that we know little about the breadth of organisms in any one ecosystem, but then each of those probably has life cycle stages that differ in their susceptibility and may even, in fact, respond to different parts of changes in, for example, the carbonate system. So here is the life cycle of the Dungeness crab. The adults and the juveniles live in benthic environments, which is why they're shown on the bottom here. And when the eggs are released and turn into zoea and megalopy. Those stages live more up in the water column, and so the sort of scale of the conditions that they will encounter in those parts of their life cycles are going to be different when it comes to acidification, hypoxia, temperature, etc. And so I've focused this next slide on the acidification and hypoxia implications for crab. We know, because there have been monitoring efforts on the West Coast for hypoxia for longer than there have been for acidification, we know that there have been extensive crab kills noted from hypoxic events along the Pacific Northwest coast. And we're starting to learn through another project funded by the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program that there are effects on various life stages of the carbonate system. So I think at Northwest Fisheries Science Center, they looked at effects of changes in acidity on eggs and zoea, and saw I think it was differences in hatching rate and survival with the youngest life stages. We were funded, this is work led by Sam Sidlecki and the field effort led by Nina Bednarczyk, looking at effects on megalopy. So Nina has done some imaging work, and Casey Sanger at University of Washington has as well. It seems to indicate that megalopy are susceptible to lower saturation states of calcium carbonate. And so that's very much ongoing work. But if you kind of map out the different life stages and what each may be susceptible to, that's another level of complexity we have to deal with in the sort of wicked problem of understanding effects of these linked stressors on our coastal ecosystems. So I did start to work on a pteropod-related slide, but it's not at a point that I'm happy with, so I'm not showing it here today. But, of course, there are probably organisms on the west coast, in the Northeast that you would want to focus on that might be different. And that's where I guess I would suggest that, either through the effort that created the figures in the slides that Rue showed, or through working with Hunter at University of Washington, you could probably get nice images of those drafted if you wanted to make your own visual tools more specific to the Northeast, the Gulf of Maine ecosystem, for example. Okay, and then let's see, being a federal scientist in this time when federal science is threatened, felt like part of what I might be wanting to communicate about more effectively with a broad range of partners is sort of like what the role of federal scientists is in thinking about how to manage all of these complex coastal ocean problems. And so I have a slide here about the Federal Research Acts that do certainly relate to management efforts, but are, I think, at least at this point, more focused on researching these coastal ecosystem stressors. So, for starters, there's the Federal Ocean Acidification Research and Monitoring, the FORAM Act, that was passed in 2009 and was responsible for actually funding officially and creating for the first time the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program, which has organized a great community of researchers around this issue. And then more recently, I didn't even know about this until I gave the talk a few weeks ago to the NOAA Ocean Acidification Working Group, and they mentioned this act called HABARCA, the Harmful Algal Bloom and Hypoxia Research and Control Amendments Act. So, that organizes research around harmful algal blooms and hypoxia, and I don't know a lot more about that one, but of course these have a lot more overlap than what I've shown here, because you could really probably draw these shapes to encompass the whole ecosystem, but I welcome input on how best to draw these shapes if one wanted to really show the full reach of these programs. This one is a bit rough, in my opinion. And then, thinking about, as opposed to federal research efforts and mandates, there are also federal ecosystem management or regulatory acts that federal scientists work on as well. So, there's the Clean Air Act, which is responsible for the CO2 and many other things in the atmosphere. Clean Water Act has provisions for monitoring water quality related to pH, and there's work on the West Coast on, seeing whether there are better water quality criteria to use to determine effects on ecosystems for ocean acidification. But then, different parts of the ecosystem are kind of actually covered by different regulatory acts, and this is where that, the sort of wicked problem that DeVries and her co-author talked about, where you've got multi-agency jurisdiction, and then, you could have a similar network of things applying to these ecosystem level problems at the state level that would be interesting to map out as well. But since the federal level is more where I think about actions in ecosystem management, that's where I started with this. So as far as ecosystem effects of CO2, I highlighted some of the characters here that one might look to that would be within the jurisdictional boundaries. So that's generally out to about 3 nautical miles, I think, where EPA and state agencies tend to work. And so, all of these, especially the shellfish and crabs, are things that might fall well within those boundaries and would be relevant to the biological impacts of pH, and I suppose for hypoxia as well. Then there are all sorts of, aquaculture regulations and safety things that a variety of federal agencies play a role in, where they interface with, fisheries and human health and so forth. And then kind of thinking about the larger and the sort of charismatic megafauna, if you will, of the sea. There's the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which covers, I don't know if it's just fin fisheries. Perhaps you all are more aware of the details than myself. But then there's the Endangered Species Act, which covers some of the populations of salmon on the West Coast and orcas, some populations, perhaps not all. And then, Marine Mammal Protection Act that, again, covers, marine mammals and human interactions with them. So, you can start to see how complicated the regulatory network is. But, perhaps, I guess in my mind, mapping out some of these things can just be helpful for then identifying productive paths forward. And so, these are the sorts of visuals I've been coming up with to, try to facilitate or work with different partners in working on some of these problems. Let's see, what do we have next? Oh, okay, so here, I guess this is my second to last slide. So if you guys have questions, maybe good time to start typing them in while I just tell you about this last effort that we're doing on this project. So this is these individual boxes have 2D animations of results from Samantha Sidlecki's model from the JScope project of ocean conditions. So through an upwelling season, and I forget which year this is for, but you see bottom oxygen, bottom temperature, bottom pH, and aragonite saturation state on the right in bottom waters along our coast during the spring to fall upwelling season. And so what we're doing now is working in partnership with the same group at University of Washington, as well as Bruce, whose last name is Bruce Campbell at Rhode Island School of Design, who was formerly at University of Washington. We're working on visualizing these model outputs at higher resolution in 3D, so we can actually get animated. Well, this is the vision. We're just at the beginning of this work, but sort of visualize the changes that are at the surface, as well as in kind of cross section and along shore, And we're going to, if you look at this oxygen box on the left here, we're going to try to focus that on the Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary here off of the northwesternmost corner of the lower 48. And this sanctuary has self-identified after a workshop this fall as the first ocean acidification sentinel site. But it is sort of a hot spot for corrosive conditions, and also has really interesting kind of spatial complexity and gradients of hypoxia and acidification within the sanctuary. So we're trying to visualize these biogeochemical patterns in 3D, although it could be done with temperature as well, to try to create a better way of showing people what we're talking about when we're talking about hotspots, for example, in ecosystems that are important, for example, for Dungeness crabs. So these are some of the other kinds of tools that we still have in progress at the present time. So perhaps in the fall I will have something to show you all on that effort. And yeah, so stay tuned on that. I guess taking a step back, I did want to say my intention is to make these slides available to the ocean acidification community once they're done. I have incorporated feedback from a lot of people. I'd love to incorporate feedback from this group, which has sort of different perspective than the West Coast partners that I work with a lot. And so when I've kind of got everything incorporated, I will make them available through Ocean Acidification Program, and reach out to NECAN as well. And let's see. So I guess my closing thought is just, the reality of multiple stressors affecting our coastal oceans is that we really have to, we as scientists, and I guess all of us as stakeholders in coastal ocean health, need to try to grapple with and understand the complexity, engage broadly with each other to try to make our science most and observations that we're making, models that we're building, be most relevant to societal needs, so that we can envision and test the best solutions in a timely fashion, and communicate clearly about what we're seeing, and I think also about why all the various parts of our partnership networks are necessary. I see, as sort of taking my NOAA scientist hat for a moment, just as a citizen, I think that perhaps there's a need to communicate about the role for federal programs in some of these efforts, as well as state programs and so forth, that maybe needs to be made a little bit more explicit to highlight for people why, if these observing programs go away, it's actually not going to help the economy when a fishery crashes and we don't know why. So with that said, these were my thoughts going into creating this slide deck, and I think I'll end there and see if you guys have any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Simone, for today's presentation. We do have some questions, so I'm going to read them out.
Okay.
And questions and suggestions. So
okay.
The first is from Katie, who asks, who can folks reach out to at PML to get the graphics for website or report use?
So you mean the ones that I've shown today, I presume? So that'll be me. And like I said, you probably got that question before. I just said I make them available as well through the OAP, the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program. And I'll send a copy or a link at least to you as well, Ruth, so that you can put that on the NECAN website under sort of community resources.
Great, thank you very much.
You bet.
And a question here from Ron, who says, you believe in presenting as information-rich imagery as possible. Will it be possible to animate such complex process combinations for decision-maker audiences that animation may be effective?
Yeah, I guess I would really love more thoughts on how to do that. I did think about that. And Ron, if you want to reach out to me, I'm a quick Google away to my I'll tell you all my email address is simone.r.alin@noaa.gov. You can always also ping NECAN if you didn't catch that. So I'd love ideas on what would be the most effective way to do that for that specific audience, because I could see you could add in arrows one at a time and sort of animate it so that you could talk through it smoothly. But I also could see that it might be slightly different for each audience that you might have, and so that's where I just wasn't quite sure how to do it. Or if you mean like having critters swimming around and interacting, that's a totally different thing. All of these are possible, but I guess I would love more information on what do you think would make the most effective communication tool for that audience.
Great. Ron also noted that the low pH waters have been implicated in failed post-smoltification of Atlantic salmon, if I read that out right.
What was that? So failed. What was that?
Smoltification of Atlantic salmon.
Oh, okay. All right.
And we should be able to send you a copy of all of these.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's good. I'll not take notes then. Okay, that's interesting. I know that folks have done various work on the West Coast with salmon, including a postdoc who's working with some of the Pacific salmon species at Northwest Fisheries Science Center now. So, for sure, they should link up with, if they haven't already, with the folks on the East Coast doing that work. They probably have. This is a little far from what I do.
Okay. And then a quick question from Rebecca. What do the dotted lines mean?
Oh, let's see. I was trying to indicate where multiple stressors are interacting with each other. So, for example, here you've got ocean warming, which is itself influencing hypoxia, which is another stressor. I guess, so, well, okay, yeah, so the dashed line, this was the one I had the hardest time with. The dashed line from respiration to hypoxia, I guess, reflects that, acidification again, or sorry, warming again is influencing hypoxia from a different angle. So the arrow directly from warming is that, increased temperatures result in lower oxygen saturation just from a physical perspective, but then also changes the rates generating hypoxia. So they're, intended in my mind to show interactions between stressors like ocean warming and acidification, both affecting harmful algal bloom intensity. That's what the dashed lines indicate, whereas the solid lines indicate more impacts on organisms. Or, for example, in the case of harmful algal blooms, it's not so much that like the shellfish influence are sort of impacted directly, but that they retain those toxins, which trickles up to affecting humans. So, the slides are still complicated, and I guess, using these, one might just be very clear in one's own mind, and making sure to communicate to each audience what exactly each of those things mean. I guess I could even put a key down here. I don't know if that's just more stuff that would make it too busy, but that would be a possibility. Dashed lines could also just be used for emphasis. So these are places where one could potentially customize these sorts of slides for oneself. And I will say that I worked with Hunter on creating the basic slide deck, but I've done a lot of these little tweaks on arrows and stuff myself. I would want people to work with him because, he was very generous in letting me do that. But, it's sort of like his bread and butter. So, if you wanted to have a slightly different, like a different combination of stressors or something different about the ecosystem, species, whatever, I would refer folks to Hunter to kind of create those more customized solutions. But I'm open to making a few alternates with like, okay, arrows that are dashed mean different things for your application, and I could make a few of those that would be in the final slide deck.
Great. Couple of things from Sylvia, one of which is I would agree that pluses and minuses is probably too much complexity.
Okay.
Plus there's the challenge of a negative effect versus a negative feedback loop.
Right, yeah.
And then she has a question, have you had any participants interpret the colors in the water as pollution? It is a really common frame that the only problem for ocean environments is point source pollution.
Huh, yeah. I guess I'm curious whether she means like the green and the red and the surface ocean, or just the natural colors where you see brown or green in the waters and they don't know how to interpret that. Do you have an interpretation of what was meant,
I
Rue?
think it's probably the green and the red is what
Yeah, okay.
But, maybe she'll type in something to clarify it a little bit later on, and we'll get there at the end.
Okay. I guess I could sort of say that I haven't gotten that specific feedback on the figure, but I can say that, let's see, I think his intention was to have the green reflect primary production, which may be influenced by river-borne nutrients, or in our case on the West Coast, more upwelling driven nutrient delivery. The red offshore, I have mixed feelings about myself. I kind of put the harmful algal blooms there just because one has association with red and bad, but it's not necessarily okay.
Sylvia wrote a little note saying it was the red and the green that she was talking about.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, those are things that I could ask Hunter to tweak if it seems like that's giving too much of a message. I think the point originally when we had used some red water, it was actually in the bottom, and it was more showing the corrosive water upwelling on the shelf. In this particular figure, I'll have to say I don't think we specifically talked about that, but the harmful algal blooms. Yeah, so I guess I would say in my mind the harmful algal blooms and the red, the sort of bad association. So that was why I put the harmful algal blooms there, even though of course they would probably just be green like any other kind of primary production, and it's not until you start actually seeing the dead sea lions washing up on shore or measuring the toxin production in the water that you would actually know that it was more harmful, except in the case of something like a red tide, which would actually be red.
Yes. Okay, so moving on to one from Sam, who looks like they have left, but it's a good comment. The graphics with multiple arrows are busy. One way to reduce this for clarity whilst permitting sequential addition to illustrate complexity would be to add a transparency slider for each arrow color category. In this way, you could show OA effects alone or hypoxia effects alone to be clear, and then decrease transparency for both at the same time to show the OA hypoxia effects together.
Huh, yeah, I guess I wonder if they think that would be more effective than, sort of trying to separate them out as I did and then layer them back together. Because actually, yeah, certainly one could do that, but I felt like it might be more time consuming to do that way. But I guess on the positive side, it would sort of like draw out different parts of it while still showing the complex network that was in. I'd be curious what others think of doing it that way versus the way I've done it with separate layers.
You would also have to have some interactive platform to make it that possible.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I guess I wonder if that was sort of what the person who commented about making it a little bit animated might have meant, in that you could do it that way, but it might be a pretty crude animation where you're just doing successive slides and looping them together or something, so that it was just highlighting certain arrows and then layering them together, as opposed to here where it, well, yeah,
Well, something to think about anyhow.
yeah, definitely, and I would really love to have those folks reach out and give me a little more detail on what their thoughts were on how it would make it more accessible.
Great. Well, we'll make sure to include your email with a follow-up email to everybody.
Okay, great, thank you.
And a comment from Paula, a question. Simone, this is terrific. Just a thought to help with the graphic depictions. Perhaps you could make this series of layered graphics into an interactive graphic that highlights certain pathways, including pluses and minuses, depending on which parameters you choose to select. So very similar to the kind of previous one.
Yeah.
The domino or cascade of impacts are, but this is great where you are going.
Wonderful. Thank you for the positive feedback, and I love that idea. I have been talking with the folks at the NOAA OA program about doing a story map, which I don't think is actually explicitly interactive, but I don't know how that would be done. If you have, Paula, if you have an idea of like what program we'd use to do that, maybe Hunter does at UW. I'll ask him about that. I like that, because then one could certainly make it so if you click on an arrow, even like a box with more information would come up to tell you about, the nutshell of, the research that's been done on that topic or something like that. So I will ask the NOAA OAP folks if that's something that they could help make happen. That could be a really cool thing to have on the web.
Great. Got a question here from Rebecca. What is bottom omega?
Oh, that was the aragonite saturation state on the ocean floor. So in this slide, yeah, I tried to say it verbally, but you may not have seen my mouse, because there's a lot on this slide to look at. So this left panel, bottom, water, oxygen, and then temperature, pH, and aragonite saturation.
Great. And a quick comment from Tracy. Hi, Simone, great presentation. Did you say who the audiences of these infographics are?
Oh, thank you, Tracy. I didn't say specifically, because for me, having worked with Hunter, I had asked him for the flexibility to change the arrows around for different talks that I might give. So, sometimes I give talks at aquariums, that sort of thing. Or, maybe for a different presentation, it would be a talk to like graduate students at University of Washington who are, climate scientists, that sort of thing. So I will make a kind of more finalized slide deck that will not necessarily have that flexibility available to the community. And so I'm trying to get something that people feel would be useful to, a broad audience of partners or policymakers or whomever. But, if I were presenting to a group that included a lot of non-scientists, I might focus on a different, and depending on what they ask me to talk about, might change the arrows and the specific content of some of those slides around a bit. I know that's a non-answer, and I'm sorry about that, but I think a lot of us are concerned with communicating to policymakers about the need for funding for the various aspects of what we do. So, that might be a reasonable audience to try to nail down a more static version of the slides for, in my mind.
Okay. And then there's just a thank you from Kenneth. here, and also a suggestion from Sylvia. If you have not already, I highly recommend that you read the documents from Frameworks Institute about framing complex ocean science.
Yeah. Okay. If she has a link to send me, that'd be great. I worked with the aquarium on some ocean acidification stuff that's being presented in aquariums around the country, but I didn't specifically see their documents on complex ocean issues. So I'll Google that, but if she has a link of what she's thinking of in particular, that'd be fantastic to get. Thank you.
Okay, and Chris says, hi Simone, these slides are really engaging and the artwork is very well done. However, slides can seem static sometimes. Have you explored using video at all?
Yeah, I guess I'll just sort of reiterate what I keep saying, which is I'd love thoughts on kind of how to do that. I mean, with the slide I have showing now, you know, we do intend to make that be animated for showing the progression of seasonal conditions on the coast throughout an upwelling season, for example. But I really struggle a little bit with knowing how to animate the multi-stressor slide. So I will be excited to get from at least 3 people now who have commented on that some specific ideas on how to make it more animated. I guess, yeah, other than doing stuff in PowerPoint and making it into a movie, I don't have a ton of experience with the graphical side of things. So I'll talk to Hunter as well. We did talk about that at first. But yeah, I do welcome different perspectives.
Yeah, a suggestion here from Paula is also you could also make little pop-up text boxes that show when you click on a given stressor way, like you talked about in the integrated graphics that briefly summarize the cascade.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I guess I would just say too that, you know, in my mind, you know, I would make something that would be kind of broadly useful, but I wouldn't necessarily clutter up the deck I'd make available to the public with that sort of thing, because I think that each person presenting using any of the, you know, whatever of the graphics suited their need on that day could add, you know, like circle an arrow and put in a box of detailed information. So I love that idea of making it more interactive, and so I'll try to figure out how to do that on a website, for example. But I think also that all of you guys should think about how one might do that with a more general, you know, slide deck where it's not made too specific for anyone to use for a broader range of presentation needs.
A comment from Beth that says, I've often heard using red and green is not advisable due to human color blindness.
Ah, yes, good call. So I will look at the slides again with an eye to that. Okay.
And then, because we're running out of time, I think I'm going to just kind of take 1 or 2 more. There's a whole, we'll send you the rest of them.
Okay, thanks.
So that you can reply back to people.
Okay, thanks.
But there's Lisa's saying that she liked the red and green colors. It helped her to visually separate the effects.
Okay.
So that was a bit of a feedback, and then the suggestion to go to esri.com for story maps. Yep.
Yeah. Already in the plan to do something like that. So that'll be a learning curve for me this summer or fall to get on that, and maybe that'll provide sort of the animation opportunity that people are talking about. I don't know enough about how those work yet, but that was a major idea that came up for where to go with some of this at the NOAG presentation I did a few weeks ago. So I will definitely pursue that. Okay, so I guess you indicated 11 was our hard deadline, and I just want to reiterate my thanks to this audience for listening today and for all the great suggestions. And I'll look forward to interacting with some of you guys more on the details. Thanks, Rue.
Great. Thank you very much, Simone. Just for everybody who's left on the phone, that the next presentation in this schedule or on this webinar is scheduled for July the 24th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time by Dave Cullen and Sarah Kingston, who are from Bowdoin College. So thank you all very much for your time today. Everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.